Hello and welcome to the JSA Studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today I'm coming at you with a Week 1 reaction, specifically from the perspective of the Big Ten Conference. The Big Ten Conference went 17-1 in opening weekend. Probably should have gone 18-0 if not for Minnesota missing a game-winning field goal. Now, before we get into the video proper, so at this time I would like to ask you to like, comment, and subscribe. And now with the intro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to get started. And we're going to get started with the first tier, or as I like to call it, the Scarlett Johansson tier, because these teams look pretty good. It's also important to remember throughout this video, the tier rankings, so to speak, are not based upon how good I think the team is. It's based upon how good I think they looked this past week. So when I'm putting these teams into tiers, it is not based upon how good I think the team is. At the end of the video, we will do power rankings. But for now, we're just going to start with the tier 1 of teams this past weekend. And that, of course, is headlining the whole Big Ten, in my opinion, is Penn State dominating a West Virginia team that a lot of people thought was going to compete for the Big 12 championship. And they might end up still doing that. But it was very clear pretty much from the start of the second quarter that West Virginia did not belong on the same field as Penn State. They were different qualities of team. West Virginia, I think, is a good team. They could end up winning 8 or 9 games this year. Penn State, I think, is staring down the barrel of 11-1 and a spot in the Big Ten championship game. Now, I will say this. The defense is a little bit more suspect than I think the majority of people are presenting it as. The fact of the matter is that West Virginia runs a kind of gimmicky offense that either works or it doesn't. And it wasn't working today because Penn State had the athletes to be able to stop it. However, there were opportunities that West Virginia missed to either keep a drive alive or to put points on the board. So the defense is perhaps a little bit more suspect than it is being presented as, which if you remember my preseason breakdown for the Big Ten, I talked about Penn State and how I thought the offense was going to improve dramatically, and I was correct about that, and about how I believe the defense was likely going to take a step or maybe even 2 steps back from being a genuinely elite unit to maybe a borderline good to great unit. However, the improvements on the offensive end might end up being bigger than I anticipated. And because of that, I think there's a very, very real possibility Penn State is going to kind of backdoor their way into the Big Ten championship game because Michigan, Ohio State, and Oregon all play each other, and one of those teams is very likely to end up with 2 losses from those 3 games. All right, getting away from generalities here, we're going to go more into the specifics. Drew Allar looked like a completely different quarterback. Even in the games where he played well last year, like against Indiana, he did not look as composed. He did not look like he had this level of mastery of the offense. And that is very, very good because Drew Allar is probably the most physically talented quarterback in the Big Ten. Or at least starting quarterback, I should say. Julian Sayin for Ohio State, Alex Orji for Michigan. Physical talents, okay? But in terms of starting quarterbacks, Drew Allar has legitimate #1 pick in the draft type upside. I don't know if he's going to get there. If he plays as well as he did against West Virginia for the rest of the season, and specifically against a team like Ohio State, then I could genuinely see him getting top 5, top 10 sort of hype, especially because this year's quarterback class is wide open. And even though I kind of shit talk the defense a little bit here, West Virginia does have a very good to great offense, even though it is a little bit gimmicky and it is a little bit, if it's working, it's unstoppable. And if it isn't working, it's very easily stoppable. Even though West Virginia's offense is kind of hit and miss like that, overall, that's still a borderline great offense this year. And I think it'll probably finish in the top 20 offenses in the country. So the defense being able to hold that to 12 points is very, very good. That is a good sign going forward. I think the defense borderlines right now on good to great. I have to see it more in the future against maybe some better competition, which likely is not going to happen until USC. And USC will be coming off of what I think is going to be a bloodbath in Ann Arbor against Michigan. So I don't know if we're going to see USC at 100% there, but UCLA doesn't got an offense. Illinois don't got an offense. Kent State don't got an offense. Not like anything that we've seen here. So even though I still have some question marks surrounding the defense, I don't think it's going to fall off as dramatically as I thought it was going to this offseason. Mainly because going from Manny Diaz to Tom Allen is a very big drop off, even though I do think Tom Allen kind of maybe a little bit got shafted because he was at Indiana. Like, I think their current coach, who came from James Madison, whose name I can't remember, is also probably going to get shafted simply because of the fact that he's coaching at Indiana. However, I don't think Tom Allen is an elite caliber defensive coordinator. I think he's good. I think he's a solid defensive mind. However, I don't think he's someone that's going to get taken away for another head coaching opportunity unless this defense really starts to ball out either this year or in the future, which I don't particularly anticipate happening, because if you can have a good to great offense like you're going to have this year, in my opinion, potentially you could even have an elite offense if you really get going. And when you have an offense of that high of a caliber, it's very hard to play defense at anything beyond a competent level. And you're seeing, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but you're seeing USC kind of figure that out. Lincoln Riley called that game versus LSU significantly differently than he has called football games really in his entire career as a play caller. That was a incredibly different Lincoln Riley that we're seeing at USC this year than we have seen him previously. And the main reason why that offense has been dialed back isn't the level of quarterback. Moss is great. I think he's very, very good. But it's more because having that high quality of an offense puts your defense in terrible situations because they're playing maybe even up to twice as many snaps as they could be in a specific game with a offense that isn't as explosive. So you're seeing Lincoln Riley adjust and saying, oh shit, if I'm going to win at a high level, then I need to be able to play defense. So he went out and got one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. And he went out and said, I'm going to change the way that I call the offense. And this year, I think Penn State may have also done the same. They might have said, I'm going to go out and get an offensive mind, and we're going to actually try to put points on the board this year, as opposed to being a run the ball, grind it out kind of team, because the defenses in the Big Ten are very, very good, and that's not hyperbole. When they play out of conference, the defenses are also still very, very good. Final point I wanted to talk about for Penn State before we move on to the second team in the Scarlett Johansson tier is that based off of what I've seen in the first week, and things are going to change. It's not that they could change. Things are going to change. You guys have the best running game in the Big Ten right now. Oregon didn't run the ball. Michigan didn't run the ball until Fresno State got tired because Michigan is bigger, better, and more athletic than they are at the end of the game, okay? Michigan has massive problems on the offensive line, and we're going to talk about that when we get to Michigan towards the end of this video because they're in the bottom tier. Ohio State was not particularly impressive to me, specifically with their run blocking in their offensive line, and they were playing a very, very bad Akron team. That is a team that is going to struggle to win 3 games this year. That is not a good team, and only scoring 17 points in the first half, even though you ended the game 52-7 or 3 or whatever it was, that was not a good sign when it comes to the quality of what that running game is going to look like this year. So I think it's a very reasonable take to say that Penn State is going to have the best running game this year in the Big Ten, at least right now. The second team in the Scarlett Johansson tier of looking good, and that is Nebraska. Nebraska, I was thoroughly impressed with. And I could tell from the first offensive series that this team had that this was a different Nebraska team. And I'm not a big Coach Rule kind of guy. I don't think he's going to be able to turn Nebraska into like a powerhouse in the Big Ten or anything. However, Dylan Raiola is that guy. He is incredibly talented. You do have a pretty manageable schedule. In fact, that's probably overstating it. You have a very easy schedule, especially with the way teams that I thought were going to maybe take a step forward appear to have not taken that step yet. The defense, I thought, still looked really solid and really competent and really well coached. The offense, with a real quarterback now, is going to be better than it has been in a very long time, maybe going all the way back to when Taylor Martinez was there. And that was a pretty good offense. It wasn't great or anything, but it was a good offense. And that's where I think Nebraska is going to be this year. Again, they have a very workable schedule. They don't really play anybody. I mean, Colorado can put points on the board potentially. So maybe that's a little bit of a toss. I think Nebraska is very clearly a better team than Colorado right now. But you don't really play anybody after Colorado that you shouldn't be able to handle pretty easily until Ohio State. Now, maybe with Indiana, competent coaching staff, they're looking better themselves. At least in 1 week, they looked better. Maybe that's get caught looking ahead kind of game, but I'm not ready to have those conversations yet. You should be undefeated when you go to play Ohio State in Columbus. And then after that, you should be able to take care of UCLA pretty easily. Nebraska in USC, question mark there. Should be able to beat Wisconsin. And then Iowa, if the Iowa offense is what it was in the second half of their game this year, that's a toss-up. However, I would lean towards the Iowa offense not being that, and I think that could potentially be a game that decides if this season is going to be a really big step forward or just a step forward. Now, once again, pivoting away from the general sort of discussion surrounding Nebraska football right now, I want to get into a little bit of specifics. And the two things I want to talk about is Dylan Raiola himself, who looked really, really good. However, he's a very young quarterback. And even though he does have first overall pick sort of upside, I believe he was the number one player in the entire class this past year. He was definitely the number one quarterback. I don't remember if he was the number one player or not. It was either him or Jeremiah Smith for Ohio State. But either way, he looked like a big-time player. However, he is still young. So there's going to be ups and downs. It's going to be a roller coaster. And the main reason why you're playing him now is because you're going to get 2 more years of him playing football, which means if you can develop him, you're going to have maybe the best quarterback in the Big Ten next year. And 2 years from now, you absolutely should have someone that's going to be talked about in the first overall selection of the NFL draft conversation. So the reason you play now is because by the end of this year, you're hoping that he can kind of get it all figured out and that the freshman sort of young quarterback stuff is going to go away. And then heading into next year, you're going to have a veteran quarterback with a limitless ceiling, inheriting a Big Ten conference that has more question marks than Drew Carey's Riddler costume. So what I'm trying to say is this could be a team that takes, the one step forward or maybe a big step forward this year. But then heading into next year, we could be looking at a top 10 team in the country in the preseason polling. This is a team that is being set up to succeed in the long run. Other point I want to hark on here is last year you guys had a quality defense that didn't particularly play any high quality offenses, but the defense I thought still looks good. And more importantly than that, the run defense looks like it's going to give teams a headache. And when you can make a team like in Iowa or potentially in Ohio State one-dimensional, it makes it much easier to defend. And that could lead to upsets. The final team of 3 in the Tier 1 or the Scarlett Johansson team, because they're looking pretty, is USC. And this team is perhaps better than I thought they were going to be entering this season. You do have a more difficult schedule than a team like Nebraska. You do have to come to Michigan. However, Michigan's not the team that we all thought they were, most likely. And you also have a bye week heading into that week, which is an incredible advantage, especially early on in the season. So there's a definitive possibility that you're going to be able to beat Michigan because you're going to have 2 weeks to game plan for him. And I think that there's a very real possibility that Lincoln Riley is just going to take Wink Martindale to school, and which is crazy because Wink Martindale is like twice the age of Lincoln Riley. However, Lincoln Riley is twice the offensive mind that Wink Martindale is the defensive mind. And Michigan's defense, as opposed to years in the past with Zach Minter and Mike McDonald, is much more exposed to be able to hit big plays on than under those two guys because of the style of defense that Wink Martindale plays that doesn't work in the NFL and also doesn't work in college football. But for some reason, everybody wants to do what they're doing, which doesn't make any goddamn sense to me. However, that is a little bit irrelevant to this conversation. USC is sitting pretty. I think that there's a very real possibility with your schedule that you could end up going undefeated. And even though you have a harder schedule than a team like Nebraska, you don't play Oregon, you don't play Ohio State, you do play Penn State, but that's at home. You do play Michigan on the road, but that's after a bye. And then you play Notre Dame at home to end the year. Nebraska is not a team that you can overlook. Washington potentially is not a team that you can overlook, even though I don't think they're very good. But everybody else you should be able to handle pretty easily. Minnesota doesn't have an offense. Wisconsin might not have an offense. Maryland doesn't have a defense. So I think this is going to be a pretty manageable schedule for you heading into this year. Penn State is going to be the turning point of the season. If you beat Michigan, then you're going to soar into the top 10 probably, even though Michigan's going to lose to Texas this week. But that will still be another ranked win for you, and then you would have 2 in your first 3 games or 4 weeks of the college football season. And that's going to put you in the top 10, flat out and straight up. That's going to put you into the top 10. And then you're going to have another top 10 matchup against Penn State 2 weeks or 3 weeks after Michigan, 2 games in between those. Meaning at that point that you could potentially lose 2 of Penn State, Nebraska, and Notre Dame and still have a pretty good chance to get into the playoffs. So this is a team that went from, I don't know if they're really going to be able to compete for the playoffs this year, to beating LSU, who I think LSU was a little bit overrated, but still probably one of the 20 best teams in college football this year. And it was a pretty much even match for the most of this game, and you did win, which means I'd probably put you somewhere in the top 15, which puts you right on the edge of making the college football playoff. So this is a team that is firmly in that discussion right now. Getting into the more specifics here, Miller Moss is very, very good. Lincoln Riley has done it again. Is Miller Moss going to be the first pick of the draft? No. Is Miller Moss going to be a first-round quarterback? Maybe. I don't know. But I do think he's an NFL prospect. He might fall into that tier of QB like a Hendon Hooker or a Kellen Mond or somebody else that I can't think of. Those are the only 2 that came to me. That goes early on into day 2 and then just kind of flounders around in the NFL where, like, you're not good enough to be a starter, but you make too much money to be a backup on a really good team. That's kind of where I see Miller Moss right now. That could change as he gets more comfortable in the offense and gets more experience under his belt. However, he is for real. Right now, you can make an argument he is the second best quarterback in the Big Ten. I would put Drew Allar after 1 week, so massive asterisk, of course. But I would put Drew Allar at number 1 and Miller Moss at number 2 after 1 week. The defense is good, which is strange for a USC and Lincoln Riley team. And I don't know, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know if USC's defense is actually good, because I don't know if LSU's offense is as good as they looked when they were on, so to speak, although they spent the majority of the game off. And LSU definitely, due to sometimes bad luck, due to most of the time poor play calling and bad execution, left a lot of points on the board. I think we need to pump the brakes on how good the defense is. However, at the very least, I can tell you for a fact that this defense is not going to be incompetent. This defense is, at the very worst case scenario, just going to be a normally bad defense. I have serious questions about your ability to rush the passer. However, LSU's offensive line is tremendous. It might be a top 10 unit in college football. So how much of that is you're playing a very good offensive line? How much of that is your defense maybe can't rush the passer as well as you would like? I don't particularly know the answer to that question because it's the first week of the season. However, it's definitely improved. The last specific thing I want to talk about is Zachariah Branch is the second coming of Tavon Austin. And as long as you get him the ball like 10 times a game, you're going to be pretty good. Okay, we're finally past Tier 1. On to Tier 2. These are the teams that looked good. That they looked, pretty. But not that good. Not Scarlett Johansson pretty. So, really quickly, those teams are Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, Maryland, and Purdue. Of those, Indiana and Iowa were the most impressive to me. In fact, I'm going to start with Iowa here. Iowa, I almost put into the Tier 1. However, the first half of that game kept me from doing it. Second half, you came out, you figured some stuff out, you moved the ball a little bit. Cade McNamara looked efficient. He looked accurate. It was just generally an all-around better experience. However, I still don't believe Cade McNamara is a very good quarterback. Is he better than anybody Michigan has? Yes. Is he better than probably about half of the quarterbacks in the Big Ten? Yes. Is he someone that is going to be able to make plays when you need the offense to make plays to win the game? No, I don't believe that, which does limit this team's ceiling a little bit, in my opinion. Now, we are going to learn a little bit about this team next week against Iowa State. However, I'm not sure how good Iowa State is. I think this might be a rebuilding year for Campbell and the Iowa State Cyclones. However, that's still, I think, probably going to be a competent, well-coached football team. Now, the other thing about this team is that you do have a fairly manageable schedule. You play Ohio State, that's probably going to be a loss. Outside of that, you don't really play anybody that I would consider a top 5 team in the Big Ten. It's just Ohio State. So you could potentially be looking at a 10-2 or 11-1 team. And is that going to get you in the playoffs? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. It depends upon what happens with other teams. If you go 11-1, probably. But that would require you to run the table against, a bunch of teams that I would consider rivals, you know what I mean, like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska. And you probably go 2 of 3 in those games because I don't think Minnesota's very good. I don't think Wisconsin's very good. However, I do really like Nebraska. But outside of that, you should win every game. Now, you might get an upset here or there. That typically happens to you guys at least once a year. You do get an upset. However, this is a team that is looking pretty good right now. The other team that I think is ahead of the other 3 is Indiana. And I do really, really like the coaching hire. Curt Cignetti, I've decided to look up the name, is a high-quality football coach. I don't think you can make an argument that he isn't. And I think perhaps at a bare minimum, he will allow you to be a competent football team. And I think that of all of the coaches that Indiana has had, he is the guy that might have the best chance to get this team and turn it into a consistent bowl-eligible program. You're never going to be more than that, especially with USC and Oregon joining the conference. However, you could be a consistently quality football team. And Cignetti is well on his way to being able to do that for you. Real quickly, the other three teams, Purdue, I thought looked much better than they did last year. The offense looks like it's potentially going to at least be decent. Maryland, I think, looks like that there is not going to be as big of a drop-off from Tulila Tagovailoa to Billy Edwards. And I think the offense is still probably going to be pretty solid. However, this is a rebuilding year for you. I think, we kind of know this. So I believe this is likely going to be a team that is going to be battling for a bowl game as opposed to taking that next step forward and actually getting to 8-9 wins. Illinois, again, Belima, really solid coach. He's going to have you play competent, sound football. You're going to win all of your out-of-conference games. The difference is, can you win 3 in-conference games in order to get to that bowl game? I'm not positive you'll be able to do that this year. However, I think that you looked pretty good this past week, which would lean towards me saying, yeah, I think I can find 6 wins on your schedule. And actually, I forgot, you play Kansas next week, so you're not going to win your 3 out-of-conference games. You're probably going to lose to Kansas. However, you then play Eastern Michigan the next week, I think. And then you play Purdue, you play Rutgers, you play Minnesota, you play Michigan State. So you can get to 6 wins, provided you're a consistent enough team. However, your schedule is a little bit more difficult and less manageable than some other teams in the Big Ten. Moving on to Tier 3, this is the treading water tier. And these are 4 teams that I think did not tell me they were going to be better than what I expected them to be heading into this year. Rutgers, Ohio State, Washington, and Northwestern. Rutgers, I thought, was going to be a team that probably ends up 4-8 or 5-7. Not likely to make a bowl game, but right there if they can manage to win a couple of games that maybe they shouldn't against some of the lower tier Big Ten competition. Washington, I thought, was going to be 6-6 this year. Relatively difficult schedule. And more than that, I just think that there's a massive fall off from last year to this year. I think this is a team that is going to struggle to win games. And I did not see anything that assuaded me from that position. Northwestern, I think, is also probably going to struggle this year. I think you're going to get your ass blasted by Duke on Friday. You should beat Eastern Illinois the following week. Maybe you can beat Indiana. Maybe you can't. But then you play Wisconsin, you play Ohio State, you play Michigan, you play Iowa. I'm struggling to find 6 wins for this team. And maybe they get there, maybe they don't. But you got to remember, under Pat Fitzgerald, who I think is a much better coach than Braun, your current guy, under Pat Fitzgerald, you were sort of a 1 year on, 1 year off, or maybe 2 years off, 1 really good year sort of situation. And I don't think that's going to change. I just don't think you're the level of program that can change that. And finally, we have Ohio State. Okay, there are legitimate concerns with the way you played against Akron. What I'm not going to do is the Michigan football fan bullshit that I see a lot of Michigan people talking about how Michigan struggled against one of the best group of 5 teams. You struggled against one of the worst group of 5 teams. No, you did. You didn't struggle against Akron. You struggled in the first half, and then you came out and won 52-3 or whatever the fuck it was. You didn't struggle. You went into halftime, got some shit cleaned up, and then you dominated, okay? Now, you didn't look as good as a team like Ole Miss. However, they weren't playing anybody either, and they are a much more veteran and much more together. They spent more time together than this offense has. The defense looks like it is probably going to be the best defense in college football this year. They were the second best last year behind Michigan. This year, they're probably going to be the best. Will Howard looked okay. I did a whole dedicated video talking about Will Howard and whether or not he was going to be better than Kyle McCord. And don't let the Syracuse playing nobody and him throwing for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns let you dissuade the fact that that is a legitimate conversation in terms of who's a better quarterback, Kyle McCord or Will Howard, okay? That is a conversation. And for you Ohio State fans that are just going to be shit-talking Will Howard, stop it. You're lying to yourself. Will Howard was a good quarterback last year. He wasn't elite, but he was a good quarterback. And you're lying to yourself if you think he wasn't a good quarterback last year. Flat out and straight up. Do I think you were better off with Will Howard? The conclusion that I came to at the end of the video was, I don't know, but probably because he can move around, because the offensive line probably isn't going to be that good, because he does give you something in the quarterback run game, you are probably better off with Will Howard than you are with Kyle McCord, or at least you would have been if you still had Kyle McCord as your quarterback on this roster. So those, to me, are a little bit not more legitimate concerns. There are going to be people talking about it, and I don't think that's for real. I don't think that's a real complaint. I think by week 3, we're going to be seeing a dominant defense and a dominant offense. Okay? But what is concerning, and is an actual legitimate complaint in my opinion, is the quality of this offensive line. And I talked about it also in that Will Howard video. However, last year, your offensive line struggled the first 5-6 weeks of the season and then kind of flipped the switch and was one of the better units in the group of 5 towards the end of the season. However, they were much better at pass blocking than they were run blocking last year. This year, both of those things seem like they're going to happen again. Now, you don't play anybody. You don't play Notre Dame in week 4 this year, okay? You don't play nobody. So, heading into, in my opinion, Oregon week, that's when you're going to get your first test. I don't think Iowa has the athletes to be able to stop you from putting up 28 to like 34, 35 points against the defense, even though I think the defense is very good. I don't think they have the athletes to be able to slow down the offense to a degree where the Iowa offense, which won't be able to score more than 3 points against your defense, will be able to win them the game. So I think you're probably going to beat Iowa pretty easily, kind of just by default, provided you bring higher than your C+ game. You'll beat Iowa relatively easily. However, the next week at Oregon, on the road, big-time game, college football game day will probably be there. It'll probably be the biggest game of that week. I don't know what the rest of the schedule looks like. Probably the biggest game that week, either way. So that game is when we're going to learn about this team a little bit. Now, Oregon, who we're going to talk about next, might not be the quality of team that I thought they were. However, I think a lot of the problems that people are overreacting with Oregon are also not that big a deal. Kind of like the problems that people are overreacting with talking about Ohio State. So I think this is a relatively manageable schedule. You play 3 games, in my opinion. However, Nebraska, after Oregon, could potentially have been a game where I looked at that and I said, okay, sandwich between 2 of your 3 biggest games, between a Penn State team that's got something to prove and between an Oregon team that might be really, really good. That game, I thought, potentially could have been a trap game. However, you got a bye week after Oregon, so I don't think that's a trap game anymore. I think you're going to come out, you're going to handle Nebraska, and I think you're going to beat Penn State too, because Penn State just turns into a different team when they're playing Ohio State and when they're playing Michigan. Now, luckily, they don't play Michigan this year, so they could end up being a really good team. So, yeah, they might end up making the playoffs like 11-1, 10-2. Either way, this team has a relatively manageable schedule, Ohio State speaking. I think your absolute floor, worst case scenario, is 10-2, and that still gets you into the playoffs. So I think this is a playoff team. I think this is a team that has the potential to do a lot of damage. Right now, I think you're probably going to beat Michigan, but I always think you're going to beat Michigan. But there are some legitimate concerns to be had, mainly your ability to run block. And if you can't get the run game going, what it does is it's going to allow defenses to focus on stopping the pass. And when they do that, they can potentially slow this team down offensively. Now, your defense is good enough to where even if your offense is slowed down, probably doesn't matter that much. However, for right now, I've got you in tier 3. I didn't see anything bad enough to make me concerned about this team and where I'm going to rank them in the Big Ten, and where if I decided to do it sometime, where I would put them in like a top 25 or a college football ranking mock sort of thing. I haven't seen anything that would make me not put them as one of the top 3 teams in the country. I haven't seen anything that would move them outside of one of the top 2 spots in the Big Ten. So all these teams here, Rutgers, Washington, Northwestern, and Ohio State, they're treading water. I didn't see anything that changed my opinion on their teams this week. Moving on to Tier 4. This is the what? Tier? As in the what the hell was that sort of tier. Now, I am going to do my best to not overreact with Oregon, okay? But it didn't look great. And it wasn't just because Dylan Gabriel was just checking the ball down every time. I don't particularly think you guys tried a whole lot this week. That was mainly what I saw when I watched some of the film. It's also worth noting that you missed a field goal, turned the ball over inside the 20 with a strip sack one time, and went for it on 4th and inches at midfield and didn't get it. Okay, so in my opinion, that's at a minimum 13 points that was left on the board due to, I would say, kind of in the terms of especially missing that 4th down conversion. Bad luck. A strip sack when your right tackle doesn't even really get beat that badly. Like, he got beat, but he didn't get beat bad. That a strip sack was relatively unlucky. Your offensive lineman that was pulling, falling down, and then the guy he was supposed to block, blowing up the running back for a 1-yard loss on 4th and inches, is bad luck. And missing a field goal is also, unless your kicker's genuinely really bad, also kind of bad luck. So would this game be talked about differently if the final score was 37-14? And the answer to that question is yes. Yes, it would be. And I will say this, Dylan Gabriel is probably one of the 10 best quarterbacks in college football this year. I don't think he's top 5. In fact, if he is top 10, he's probably 9 or 10. But he's a very, very good quarterback at the college level. Opposed to a team like Michigan, you've actually got a whole lot more upside at this point offensively. The ability to run block is somewhat concerning, even beyond just that one play where you're pulling guard, tripped, and fell. The run game probably isn't going to be anything better than average this year. However, you guys are going to throw the ball like 70% of the time anyway, so I'm not positive the run game actually matters at all. Now, the pass protection actually kind of being suspect against a team like Idaho is a little bit more concerning than the run blocking. I don't think the run blocking is going to matter a whole lot. Now, you did drop back and throw the ball like 50 times, and you got beat 6 or 7 times. So percentage-wise, that's not bad. However, getting beat 6, 7, 8 times in a game, regardless of how often you throw the ball, is asking for trouble. What I saw when I watched this game was a lot of mistakes that are very easily correctable, and a lot of stuff that was, in whole honesty, just kind of bad luck. I still think this is a very, very good team that has the potential to flat out and straight up be the best team in the country. The defense, you talk about the defense giving up 14 points to Idaho. Cool. Idaho scored twice on trick plays. They were trick plays. Now, you could say the second one, they were inside the 20. Okay, cool. I don't care. It was still a trick play. And the fact of the matter is that real football teams don't run trick plays because they don't need trickery to do shit. Now, getting tricked by trick plays, do you want to see that? No. Does it matter long term? No. Is Ohio State going to run a trick play against you? Probably not. Is Washington going to run a trick play against you? Probably not. Now, Boise State might. However, I think you're going to have a regression to the mean here. Or actually, not regression. It would be a progression to the mean here. I think you're going to play really, really well against Boise State. I think you're going to blow them out. I think it's going to be a statement win for this team against maybe the best group of 5 team in Boise State. So I think that a lot of the concerns with this team are going to be gone by the time we get to next Sunday. Also, an underrated factor here is Dylan Gabriel did hurt his hand. Now, are you going to be a team that lets it rip on some true deep shots this year? No, probably not. You're going to be more of a dink and dunk. We're going to get 7 to 9 yards every play, quick, get the ball out sort of offense. That's what you were last year. A lot of screens, a lot of quick passes. Okay, that's what the offense is going to be. However, Dillon Gabriel not having the deep ball in his arsenal, at least not having the threat of the deep ball in his arsenal, is a little bit more telling than what it will be when he does have that in the arsenal next week. So I think there were a lot of factors that kind of added up together that made this be a little bit weird for this game. I think Oregon, there's a lot to improve. You were not very consistent snap to snap. However, this is still a team that has the potential to be, a Big Ten champion sort of team. This is still a team that has national championship contender in it. And it doesn't particularly have a whole lot of run up here, not like Ohio State does, because you're going to play Boise State this year, who's maybe the best group of 5 team this upcoming weekend. Weekend after that, you're going to play Oregon State. That's a rivalry game. Who knows? Week after that, you're going to play UCLA. I don't think UCLA is very good at all, but it's still a Power 5 team. Then you're going to play Michigan State. Same thing. Still a Power 5 team, though. Then you've got Ohio State coming to Eugene. And that is going to be the game that is pretty much going to decide your season. More so than the Michigan game. You're probably just better than Michigan. And more importantly than that, you are built to expose what Michigan is bad at. So I think you're a very, very bad matchup for Michigan. From like a Michigan perspective, you're a bad matchup for them. From your perspective, Michigan's a really good matchup for you, at least offense on defense. Now, Ohio State is not. Ohio State is kind of actually the opposite defensively. Ohio State is kind of built to stop what you do well. Now, I'm not positive that Ohio State is particularly going to be able to move your ball on defense, because I thought the defense looked really good. Again, 2 trick plays were the only scores you gave up on. So, without those plays, the defense was relatively consistent. And to kind of circle back to the beginning of this conversation, I don't particularly think you were trying as hard as you're going to against a team like Boise State or Oregon State, because this is an FCS team that isn't even particularly a very good FCS team. All in all, I think a lot of people are overreacting. I think you're seeing a lot of particularly Michigan fans pointing like, oh man, they struggled against a really bad FBS team. We were playing one of the best group of 5 teams. Of course we, struggled. No, that's just them deflecting from talking about what I'm going to talk about here in a second. But kind of like with Ohio State, even though there was some actual concerning things, you're going to have the opportunity and the ability to work on those things and correct those things very quickly. So I think this team is going to come out against Boise State and kind of remind everybody why you started the year ranked in the top 5. Moving on to the next tier, these are the T5 schools, and this is the tier. And though 4 teams that are here are Michigan State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and UCLA. And Michigan State, UCLA, pretty obvious. You struggled against bad group of 5 teams. Not ideal. Flat out and straight up. Not ideal. You don't want to do that. However, these are both rebuilding programs that were not going to turn it around in 1 year anyway. Now, heading into this year, I was a little bit optimistic about Michigan State. That's gone. I've changed my opinion. That's gone. That's out the window. Childs is not the quarterback that I thought he was, at least not yet. The offensive line is suspect as hell. The defense actually looked pretty all right, but I'm not positive how much of that was the fact that you were playing a very bad group of 5 team. UCLA, on the other hand, you should have lost that game. You got lucky as hell. You had no business winning that game. And I do like Hawaii's coach. I do think he's a quality coach. And Hawaii is a football team that if they can get some of the Hawaiian-born players or Polynesian sort of players that go to all these Pac-12 schools, or what used to be Pac-12 schools, to stay in Hawaii, then that could actually be a program. But they ain't there yet. And as I'm going to talk about in the power rankings, you're not anywhere near to being good. You're a bad football team this year. Minnesota, you were the sole loss of the Big Ten. Again, should have won. If you had a kicker that can make field goals, you beat UNC easily. But losing to a team without their starting quarterback is kind of rough. Max Johnson is out for the year. Maybe he'll come back next year. I don't know if he can. He might get a medical red shirt. I don't know. But it wasn't good. This might be a struggle this year, specifically because of the quarterback situation. This might be a struggling sort of year for you guys, and then maybe you can get it figured out for next season. Wisconsin. I was high as hell on Wisconsin coming into this year. I thought Wisconsin might have a chance at 9 or maybe even 10 wins. However, I'm no longer that high on this team. Tyler Van Dyke looked okay. He didn't look great. But the run game wasn't there. The offensive line did not look as good as I thought it was going to be. And the defense still looks like good, not great. And you combine that with a schedule that is shockingly less manageable than what we thought heading into the year, then this is a team that could end up not making a bowl game. You've got a nobody this week. You got South Dakota. You're going to beat them pretty badly, probably. You're going to get absolutely blasted off the map by Alabama. I don't think you're going to beat USC. Purdue looked better than I thought they were going to be. Probably should still beat Rutgers. Probably should still beat Northwestern. You're going to get blasted off the map by Penn State. Against Iowa, that's a rivalry game. You never know, but I would lean Iowa. You're going to get blasted off the map by Oregon. Nebraska is probably a better team than you. And Minnesota, at the end of the year, again, rivalry game. Never know what happens, but I would honestly lean towards you winning that game. But this is a team that is going to be shockingly disappointing to me, personally, because I thought that this team was going to be very, very good this year. And a lot of that was because I thought they were a quarterback away last year, and I thought they added a quarterback that would at least be able to be a quality quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke. That does not appear to be the case. And now I've talked about 17 Big Ten teams, meaning there's only one left. And in the 6th tier of this video is the Michigan Wolverines. They are the sole population of the Chicken Little tier, meaning, of course, that the sky is falling. Or at least that's what some of you are thinking. Now, much like Oregon and Ohio State, there is a lot of nuance to this conversation. However, a lot of the nuance surrounding Michigan is how god-awful the coaching staff was in this game. I don't think the offense was called very well. It does not look like these players were coached particularly well either. And defensively, I've got a ton of problems with Wink Martindale. And even though we'll get into it here in a minute, I don't think the Don Brown comparisons are out of left field. So we'll get to that here in a second. But what we're going to do here, we're going to start off slightly positive. I think a lot of the problems can be solved by getting better at run blocking. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Michigan can get better at run blocking pretty quick, because a lot of the problems was timing with the running backs, specifically Donovan Edwards, and players just missing their assignments. Now, one of them, there was a pulling guard, and I think it was El Hadi. El Hadi just whiffed on the guy he was supposed to block, and then that guy blew up the play in the backfield. And then there was another time Max Bredesen tripped on the center, and he fell down, and the guy that he was supposed to block jumped over him and tackled Khalil Mullings, I think, for like a 2-yard gain. If this team can get a consistent running game where they're going to get 4.5, 5 yards a carry on average, then the offense will at least be mediocre. And I'm going to talk about the running back situation towards the end of this segment here, because I've got some goddamn thoughts about Mullings versus Edwards, okay? But the offensive line, which I made a whole video about how I thought that was going to be a really good offensive line this year, and it still has the potential. I stand by everything I said in that video. Now, I predicted 2 starters to start in that video that are not starting. And I don't know about you, but Dominic Giudice better not be fucking starting. Holy shit, he played awful. He was horrible. Greg Crippen came into this game for like 1 series in the middle of the second quarter. And for somebody who was not focusing on the offensive line, I was focusing on the quarterback and the running backs for the most part when I first watched it. I noticed the difference in the offensive line instantly. Greg Crippen should be starting at center. Giudice has no business putting on pads. He should be on the inactive list. He was horrible. Easily the worst offensive lineman since before the Jim Harbaugh era that I have seen start a game for Michigan. I cannot explain to you how bad he looked this game, at least in the run game. He was awful run blocking. Pass blocking, I'm not sure about. He was probably okay. Evan Link at right tackle was awful at pass blocking this past game. But I can see what they saw with Evan Link starting him. Okay, that was a big-time recruit. I think he was like a top 250 recruit. That was a very highly rated recruit coming out of high school. I can see the upside at right tackle for Evan Link. I see it. I understand it. I don't see the upside with Giudice. I don't see any amount of upside there. Okay? Now, maybe he can get better. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I still think Greg Crippen ought to be the guy starting for this team. And even though he only got 1 series, I still think he was significantly better than Giudice. So I think that's one avenue to significantly improve this team, is potentially a new starting center and just not making as many mistakes along the offensive line, whether that be in pass protection or in the run game. Another way that this team could get significantly better, easily, is if they stop fucking rotated on defense when they had no business rotating, okay? I don't need to see Jimmy Rolder at linebacker. There's no reason to take Barham or Houseman off the field at all this year. There's no reason to do it, okay? There's also absolutely no reason why Miles Pollard should be in the game at corner. I don't need to see Amir Hall either. Jair Hill is that dude. Will Johnson is going to be a top 5 pick in this upcoming draft, even though he had the worst game of his Michigan career this past week. He got exposed, okay? And that's partially because, just to go on a little tangent here with Will Johnson, that's partially because Will Johnson does have a little bit of Darius Slay to his game, in the sense that Darius Slay will show up and shut down a top 5 receiver in the NFL one week and limit them like 3 catches for 39 yards. And then the next week he'll go out and give up like 9 catches for 125 yards against the 4th string wide receiver for the Washington Commanders. And Will Johnson does have that in him a little bit. Now, if you look at last year for Will Johnson, he went out and got utterly exposed by Caden Prather against Maryland. And then he went out and battled, presumably pretty well, I'm going to be honest with you, against Marvin Harrison, even though he got beat several times in that game. But when he was lined up against Emeka Egbuka, it was blanket coverage. Now, partially is because Emeka Egbuka is not as good as everybody is pretending him to be, but a lot of that is because Will Johnson is actually fantastic. And another little tidbit with Will Johnson is zone teams in the NFL are going to like him way more than man-to-man teams because he is significantly better in zone coverage than he is in man-to-man coverage. However, he's still really good in man-to-man situations for the most part. Getting back to the matter at hand, I am not a big fan of rotating players except along the defensive line. However, I don't want to see a 50-50 rotation on the defensive line like we had last year, where effectively it was the backups and the two other players that also rotated in quite a bit, even though they weren't part of the two deep, because Michigan played 10 defensive linemen a lot of the time this past season. And A, we don't have that kind of depth, but B, the depth is not as good as it was last year, because last year's depth is this year's starting defensive line, which is also the best in college football. So I don't want to see that depth be a 50-50 rotation. I want that starting four defensive linemen on the field 75% of the time. 75% of the time, I want that starting defensive line on the field, and I will not accept anything less than 66% of the time. The fact of the matter is there is a real and legitimate possibility that Michigan has 4 first-round picks on this defensive line. Josiah Stewart took that step. He looks like a guy that could go in the first round. Derek Moore took that step. He looks like a guy that could go in the first round. Mason Graham is a top 10 lock. Kenneth Grant, I think once he goes through the process, will be a first-round lock. Even though they have some players that I feel comfortable rotating, TJ Guy looked good. Again, he had the one penalty, and he's got to get that cleaned up. But I thought he looked pretty good. He looked like a guy that can be a quality rotational player. Camden Brandt is another player that I actually thought looked really good, especially against the run. The pass rush is a project with him. However, he's a big-time athlete, so I'm willing to kind of let him work through that. However, in obvious passing situation, it needs to be Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart out on the field. And again, one game, group of 5 competition, I get all of that. However, those two players, Moore and Stewart, look like elite caliber pass rushers and potential first-round picks, if not very early day 2, second round, top 40, top 50 pick kind of players. So I don't want to see this defensive line rotate nearly as much as it rotated last year. And now, when it comes to the interior of that defensive line, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, we know what we have there. Rayshawn Benny played phenomenally well. In fact, he was probably our best defensive tackle this past week because Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, who have been battling injuries, I believe. At least Mason Graham definitely has. Kenneth Grant, I think, just kind of had a bad game. I do think that there was a little bit of look ahead for this team, but I don't think it was more than 5% of the problems in terms of what was happening heading into this game. So I'm very confident in those 3 players. Trey Pierce didn't get enough snaps for me to really develop an opinion on him. And no, Etta, same deal. Ike Owana is another player that I don't know. Hopefully one of those 3 guys can step up, and then we can have a 4 deep on that interior, and then a 2 deep with the exterior. And then we've got 8 players that I feel comfortable playing, which is where you want to be with the defensive line. But I don't want to see those guys on the field during third and longer than 7. I don't want to see those guys on the field on first down. This needs to be a top 4 guys playing 75% of the snaps sort of defensive line this year. And before we move on to the quarterbacks, which will be the next discussion for this sort of Michigan Chicken Little tier here, I want to talk about Wink Martindale. And there's a reason why Wink Martindale does not have an NFL defensive coordinator gig, okay? And that's because his style of defense is boom or bust at the NFL level. And at the college level, there's a little bit more boom and a little bit less bust because of the level of competition of teams you're going to play, and because of the fact that, generally speaking, college teams cannot consistently do things that NFL teams can do, even with the lower standard of relative athleticism and quality of play. In other words, college teams are just not as consistent as NFL teams, which makes sense. So, with Wink Martindale, this defense is going to have way more big plays against them this year. I'm just telling you right now, because Wink Martindale is going to put them in positions where one missed tackle or one missed assignment is going to lead to 6 points. And they're going to be in those positions consistently. And that is why I think a team like Oregon is a horrible matchup for this defense. Because Oregon nigh exclusively runs screens and quick-hitting passes. And Texas, who we're going to play this week, also has that capability. And more so than that, they've got legitimate deep threats that other teams Michigan are going to play don't have. And they've got a running back that can beat you to the edge. And they've got a running back that can take the ball and go 100 yards for a touchdown. Okay? Texas is a top 5 team in the country. I don't think Michigan is. Michigan might be a top 10 team in the country if they can get some shit figured out. And to be honest with you, I think Michigan matches up the best against Texas of their 3 big games. However, Wink Martindale is going to consistently put 7 points on the board for the other team a minimum of once a game. Because when he's blitzing 3 people on 3rd and 10, which is going to happen a lot this year, if you don't get home, which is going to happen a lot, and the defensive back misses the tackle, which is going to happen a fair amount, there's nobody to back him up. So assuming the wide receivers of that team can block a little bit, that's a house call most of the time. And in the NFL, those things all happen way more consistently because of the higher quality of play of offenses and the higher quality of coaches on the offensive side. So even though I think Wink Martindale is a good defensive coach, I don't think he's as good as Mike Macdonald or Jesse Minter. Okay? Now, specifically Jesse Minter, I think Jesse Minter's a goddamn genius, and he's going to be a head coach in the NFL maybe next season, if not within 3 years. However, even beyond that, there's a reason why Wink Martindale didn't get a job in the NFL as a defensive coordinator. And it's because the way he runs that Baltimore scheme is not as good as the way everybody else runs it. Okay? Baltimore's defense this year is going to be significantly better with Zach Orr than it would be with Wink Martindale. The Seattle Seahawks defense is going to be much better with Mike Macdonald than it would be with Wink Martindale. And the Chargers defense is going to be much better with Jesse Minter than it would with Wink Martindale. Could Wink Martindale have gotten a linebacker or edge rusher positional coach job in the NFL? Yes, easily he could do that. However, he's not going to be a DC at the NFL, most likely. For the same reason Greg Williams isn't going to be a DC. For the same reason why the zone blitz fell out of style. For the same reason why Dick LeBeau was a horrible defensive coordinator the past 5 to 10 years. He was a defensive coordinator in the NFL when he was arguably the greatest defensive coordinator in the history of the NFL before that. It's because teams have figured out how to beat blitz-heavy schemes, and they figured out how to do that easily. If you're a competent offense, you can beat a blitz-heavy scheme. That's what happened with Don Brown past 2016 when teams figured it out. And Don Brown never played an offense as good as Oregon's. Don Brown never played an offense as good as Ohio State's is going to be this year. Don Brown never played an offense as good as Texas's is, mainly because Ohio State had J.T. Barrett, who was utterly incapable of throwing the ball more than 10 yards down the field for the majority of Don Brown's reign. And beyond that, the second they got a competent quarterback that could actually throw the ball in Dwayne Haskins, RIP, and then Justin Fields, they got utterly decimated both of those games because, again, any competent offense is going to be able to deal with a blitz-heavy scheme. So, if we dial back the blitzes, which in all honesty, you should only ever blitz if your starting 4 defensive linemen or the 4 defensive linemen you have on the field are incapable of getting to the quarterback on their own. That's the only time you should ever blitz, is when you don't have the best defensive line in college football. And Michigan has the best defensive line in college football. So, I don't understand why we're blitzing all the time, okay? Michigan is fully capable of getting pressure and home, provided it's a 5 or 6 man, blocking scheme on offense with 4 defensive linemen. They are perfectly capable of doing that. So I don't think we need to blitz. But we're going to, and that's going to open up opportunities for Texas to move the ball in chunk plays. All right, moving on past that. The quarterback situation is fucked, okay? Warren is not good. He is, best case scenario, a below average starting Power 5 quarterback. That's best case scenario, okay? And before people come at me with Cade McNamara, no. There is no comparing the two. Cade McNamara is so much better than Davis Warren. Even if we go back to 2021, which is what I'm comparing the two, he is so much better. And the reason for that is because Davis Warren, this past week, literally not once did he go through a read. The entire game, he stared down who he was going to throw the ball to. And it worked out because they were playing Fresno State about half the time. He left massive chunks of yardage to be gained open because he was utterly incapable of looking at anyone other than who he was going to throw the ball to or the check down option. Was it entirely on him? No. But outside of the one play to Tyler Morris on the sideline, yes, it was entirely on the quarterback. Everybody else did their job for the most part. Again, there were a couple of times where the offensive line didn't do him a whole lot of favors, but it is not anything that a competent quarterback would not have been able to overcome, except the one play where Giovanni El Hadi got utterly destroyed right up the middle. That one is not on Davis Warren, okay? But there's maybe 2 plays every time they threw the ball that were not on Davis Warren. Literally, that's it. Everything else was his fault. And I mean that. Like, I watched him throw the ball. I went back. I recorded the game on my TV. I went back and watched every single pass play. He did not do a good job. It was not good. Okay? He's not awful. He's not incompetent. Okay? But he is, at the Power 4 level, a bad starting quarterback. Now, if you have an elite run game, like Michigan has the potential to have, which we'll talk about next, but if you have an elite run game that Michigan could have, then you can mask a lot of that shit with play action because there's only one read on play action plays for the most part anyway. It's either throw it to the one guy or check down or throw it out of bounds if they're both gone. And that's it. And anybody can do those things because you're only making 2 decisions. You're going to throw it to the big guy or you're going to throw it to the check down or you're going to throw it away. Those are 2 decisions. So anybody can do that. I could do that probably, even though my fat 2-time back surgery having ass probably can't run anymore. But I could still probably make 2 decisions in 3.5, 4 seconds on a football field. Okay? Anybody can do that. That is not a high bar. And can Davis Warren do that? Yes. We saw that this game when Michigan had those 2 drives where they actually got consistent gains in the run game. They had hard play action, and he looked decent during that time. He looked like an average Power 5 quarterback. Now, all of my frustrations with Davis Warren, he is still clearly the correct quarterback. I was way too high on Alex Orji. I made a whole video about it, and I stand by everything I said in that video, which I thought was true at the time, okay? I thought Alex Orji would have at least a chance to be able to throw the football competently to the point where, like, he might be able to get, like, 200 yards a game if he threw the ball 25 times. And with what he can give you potentially with scrambling and extending plays, I thought he was going to be the starting quarterback, okay? We saw him for, like, 3 pass attempts, I think. He threw the one wide-open dump pass to Donovan Edwards for a touchdown. Cool, I don't care. Anybody, I could have made that throw. It doesn't matter. And then the other play we saw him throw the ball on was buried in the dirt to a wide-open wide receiver that would have given Michigan a first down and maybe a little bit more than that. Okay, it is obvious that Davis Warren is the correct quarterback to play right now. However, if we lose to Texas, you might as well give Alex Orji the start against Arkansas State just to see what happens. And if he doesn't look good, maybe you go back to Davis Warren for USC. And if you lose to USC, then the only option is getting Jaden Davis on the field. so that he can get experience under his belt against Power 5 competition, or Power 4 now competition, because he's your starting quarterback next year. So if we lose to Texas and USC, the only play is to put Jaden Davis on the field. The play is not to let Davis Warren start because we're trying to win games. At that point, you're eliminated from the college football playoffs. A 2-loss Michigan, the way that the rest of the college football landscape is shaping up right now, ain't making the fucking college football playoff. So if you lose to Texas and USC, A, you're probably not going to be ranked. But B, it's time to move on to the young guy, to have him get some experience so that next year the offense can get a leg up. Now, I'm not saying Michigan's going to lose to Texas. At least not yet. I'll do that on Friday. But I'm not saying Michigan is going to lose to USC, okay? What I am saying is, if we lose those games, you got to start the young guy with upside. There's no other option. I don't need to see Alex Orji. I don't need to see Davis Warren. I need to see the guy who is actually going to be on this team and be the starting quarterback next year, which is Jaden Davis. Or maybe we're going to go out and get a transfer. I don't know. I don't think Tyrone Moore is going to do that because he didn't do that this year. But the potential to redshirt him and get an extra year of Jaden Davis does not outweigh the potential benefit of him coming in and playing when the defense is going to be good enough to cover some of his young quarterback bullshit mistakes. Of which, regardless of who's that quarterback, Davis Warren or Alex Orji or Jaden Davis or Jack Tuttle, even though I don't want to see Jack Tuttle at all, we are going to see those young, inexperienced quarterback type of plays. The difference is Alex Orji is not going to be a quarterback at the Power 4 level, and Davis Warren is out of eligibility after this year. So there's no reason to suffer through the young quarterback mistakes with Davis Warren, or the inexperienced quarterback mistakes with Davis Warren, if you'd rather have me say that rather than young, because Davis Warren is a fourth-year senior who potentially could, I guess, get another year of eligibility. But if Jaden Davis can't beat out Davis Warren, then we're fucked at the quarterback position next year too. So I don't see any reason to let him play if we lose to USC and Texas. Now, if you win one of those games, ride it out. But right now, I don't know if we're going to win either of those games. The final thing I have to say about Michigan is, why the hell isn't Donovan Edwards getting consistent carries? I don't give a shit about Khalil Mullings. I get it. He's 6'2", 240 pounds, falls forward every time. He's a legitimate NFL back. I said so already in my running back breakdown video this offseason, okay? He's really good. I get that. There is no reason at all, none whatsoever. That reason does not exist. There is no rational explanation for why Khalil Mullings should be getting more carries than Donovan Edwards. That does not exist. Everything that Khalil Mullings can do, Donovan Edwards can do better. And Donovan Edwards brings a bunch of shit that Khalil Mullings does not bring to the table, okay? Donovan Edwards is the only player on offense that can take the ball to the house every time he touches it. That is the only player on offense that we have that can hit the home run ball, so to speak. Everybody else is singles and the occasional double, okay? Now, Donovan Edwards is not going to hit a single every time. He's going to strike out a lot. I believe that's a fair summation to have. However, I don't actually think he's going to strike out a lot. I think he's going to strike out more than Khalil Mullings is going to strike out, but I don't think he's going to strike out a lot, so to speak. Donovan Edwards has always been the kind of player that needs 15 to 20 touches to go. But once he gets that, he is an elite caliber running back. I mean that. I genuinely believe that. If you go back and watch Ohio State, he didn't do jack shit in 2022 until he got to the 20 carry mark, and then all of a sudden he started breaking runs and getting 5-6 yards, and then he broke the two big ones. If you go back and watch Iowa, it's the same story. If you go and watch the game against TCU, a major reason why he wasn't very good in that game was because he didn't get consistent carries because Michigan had to throw the ball to try to get back into the game. Donovan Edwards should not leave the field the first quarter offensively. Get him 10 touches in the first quarter. Get him 7 to 10 carries and maybe another catch or two so that he can get going. Because even though Khalil Mullings is probably going to be more consistent, or at least consistently get 2 or 3 yards every time he touches it, which Donovan Edwards is also fully capable of doing. He put on a ton of weight. He's a north-south guy, not an east-west guy. He never has been an east-west guy. That was Blake Corum. But there is absolutely no reason why your best offensive player should only get 11 carries. If that is going to be what this coaching staff does, then by the time we're through with USC and I'm Donovan Edwards, I'm informing Sharon Moore I will not play another snap so that I can maintain a redshirt eligibility so I can transfer to a program that actually fucking knows what they're doing. Donovan Edwards needs to be the Blake Corum of this year's team, okay? Now, is he as good as Blake Corum? No. Is he going to be as consistent as Blake Corum? No. But the only way this offense is going to end up being above average is if Donovan Edwards gets consistent carries. That is it. There is no other path to this offense being average. That's the only way, okay? I'm not saying Khalil Mullings shouldn't get carries. He should. This team should be a 2/3 run, 1/3 pass style of team, okay? That's what this team should be, okay? So you should run the ball 40 to 50 times a game, which means that you can give Khalil Mullings 10, 15, 20 touches, and Donovan Edwards can still get 20, 25, 30, okay? That's what this team has to be if it's going to be successful. So it is a cardinal sin that Donovan Edwards only got 11 carries. That is absolutely ridiculous, and there is no defending it. It does not exist. That defense does not exist. Okay, because Khalil Mullings, yes, he's very good. I've said it multiple times. He is not as good as Donovan Edwards. Unless Donovan Edwards isn't the guy that he was 2 years ago when he was getting consistent carries. Unless Donovan Edwards isn't the guy that we saw last year after the Penn State game. Unless that isn't what Donovan Edwards is, which maybe he's not that anymore. I don't fucking know. But I think he is. I think he's still someone that can be a 1,500-yard running back, assuming he can get the touches. But he's not going to get the touches, I guess, and I think that's entirely on the coaching staff. Final thing, real quick wrap up here for this video. Power rankings. These are the teams and how I rank them in the Big Ten. My number 1 team is Ohio State. My number 2 team is Penn State. My number 3 team is Oregon. My number 4 team is Michigan. My number 5 team is USC, because I think Michigan will get it together, and if they start to run block more consistently and they start getting Donovan Edwards consistent touches, I think Michigan can beat USC and end the season like 9-3, because they play 1-3, and also Texas, who would be ranked number 1 if they were in the Big Ten. Number 5, USC. Number 6, Nebraska. Number 7, Iowa, because I still don't trust their offense. Number 8, Washington, better than I anticipated. Number 9, Wisconsin, worse than I anticipated. 10, Maryland, just about what I thought they were going to be. Minnesota, Rutgers, Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, Michigan State, Northwestern, and UCLA, rounding out the bottom half of this conference. If you don't like the rankings, that's perfectly fine, because after all, what am I? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. So at this point, I'd like to remind you to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point, or you just have something to say, go ahead and drop a comment down in the comment section below. And now, with the outro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that's that I'll see you next time.